Hello there. My name is Jasom Jensai, and welcome to this stream where we're going to discuss the High Republic, specifically the book Light of the Jedi, what are the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, and we're going to discuss what is the future of Star Wars. Is it going to be in movies, like it has been before, or is it going to be in TV shows like The Mandalorian and all the new shows they announced that are coming out? But before we get to all of that, first let's go over the question of the stream. The question of this stream is, what 3 Jedi served on the Council during both Episode 1 and during the High Republic? So, if you're here watching and you know the answer to this, and it could be a different 3 Jedi, I do know for a fact that at least 3 Jedi show up in Light of the Jedi. But if you write in an answer and it's correct, then I'll give you the points even if I don't know if you're correct immediately. Like you could say guy number 1, guy number 2, guy number 3, and of course Yoda's guy number 1 because everyone knows Yoda's going to be in it. But sure, they might be in like a comic or in the other book that I haven't read yet. So I don't know for sure, but I do know at least 3, so you can get this one right. I feel like I rambled on a bit for that question, but that's totally fine. It's a stream. If you've got a problem with it, leave a chat, and I will get to that. But with that, that's the question of the stream. What 3 Jedi served on the Council during both of Episode 1 and during the High Republic? But with that, let's get on to the first segment. So Light of the Jedi is the first book that I read of the High Republic. High Republic is, if you don't know, the High Republic is a new era that Star Wars and Disney and Lucasfilm are exploring through a series of books and comics, and I believe the TV show Acolyte is in the High Republic era, but near the end of it. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I would not be surprised if they made a movie or if they made TV shows about the High Republic era, but they're at least starting with books. So there's 2 books out. I have read one of them, and I believe there's a comic as well, and I have not read that either. But I have read this book, Light of the Jedi, by Charles Soule. And this segment is just my thoughts on it. So, an overall review, like, non-spoiler, I would say it's a good book, especially if you want to know more about the Jedi as they were during that time. It is a bit, I don't know, the characters are a bit, too good, I would say. Like, it's not super bad, but, like, the Republic hasn't had a war in so long, so everyone's super optimistic. There's, like, no corruption, basically. The Jedi are peacekeepers. They're all, like, respectful of each other, respectful of people. And sure, people make mistakes, like, that's a thing, but it's almost a bit too good. But it makes sense considering the era of the High Republic. This is the Jedi at their peak. This is the Republic at its peak. So of course they're going to be good. And then there's the bad guys. They're just normal bad guys, I guess. They're like the only ones who aren't perfect, and they're kind of like the opposite of perfect. They're not super powerful, but like they're just very evil, I guess. So with that being said, I'm going to get into a spoiler review of this. So spoiler warning right now for those of you who want to read the book and haven't read it yet. So spoiler warning, go away now. You've been warned. So to start with, I have like 5 points I hastily wrote down right before hitting go live because I didn't really have time today or this week or whatever. But the first point I have right down is there's too many characters in this book. You've got like Avar Kriss, Buryaga, Loden Greatstorm, and I don't even remember half their names. There's a Duros, there's the Twi'lek's apprentice, there's some guy that was like an old master who was with them on the mission with Loden and his apprentice. I think there was another one. But the point is, there's a lot of Jedi to keep track of. There's also a lot of non-Jedi to keep track of. Well, maybe not a lot. There's also a bunch of non-Jedi to keep track of, in addition to all the Jedi to keep track of. So I don't remember people's names. Characters don't stick out as well. Um, and the book was maybe not as interesting unless you're a big Star Wars fan and enjoy the content like I am. So I guess too many characters is a potential problem with the book. I didn't see it as too much of a problem. I mean, it's holding the book back a bit, but it's still a good book in my opinion. The second thing I wrote down is it's a good insight into the Jedi. And I suppose this kind of blends with my next point. The Jedi are very noble in this. It's the High Republic, so the Jedi are at their peak. The Republic is at its peak, and they're exploring the Outer Rim. They're trying to unify it. They're spreading their light throughout the galaxy, and that's like the whole point of the book, I guess, is spreading the light of the Jedi. So, like, that's the whole point of the book. So you get a bunch of insight into the Jedi. Hello there, JDS523. How goes it? What did you think of or have you read The Light of the Jedi? And yes, I know you haven't, but yeah. What did you think of the cover art, I guess, since you haven't read the book? Yeah, so Light of the Jedi, good book. Insight into the Jedi, that's what I was talking about. One of the things that they cover a lot in this book is how the Jedi see the Force. For example, there's this one guy, I don't remember his name, I believe he's a Duros, I might be mistaking that, but he sees the Force as like an ocean, and it's like endlessly deep, and blah blah blah. And then there's Avar Chris, the person on the main cover, front and center, and she sees the Force as music. And then I don't remember what Buryaga, the Wookiee, sees the Force as. Probably a tree, is what I'm guessing. And then one guy sees it as fire, and they all see it differently, I guess. And that's an interesting concept, but really what it just shows is that when you're a Jedi, you can kind of tell that the Force is, like, I guess, very vast, and it's connecting everything. And, like, even though they see it differently, it's all the same thing, and you can see that it's that same thing, which is this vast thing that connects everything. It surrounds and penetrates and binds together and all that stuff. So that's an interesting insight into the Force that I got from Light of the Jedi. Yeah, not much more to say about that point. The next point I want to bring up is the Nihil. The Nihil are kind of interesting. Like, okay, in this time period, because there's no Sith, because there's no major wars, coming up with a bad guy is probably one of the biggest problems they struggled with, just given the time period. And I think they did a good job given what they had. They can't really use Force sensitives, so they made this, like, group of just pirates, right? What else are you gonna do? But they gave them this hyperspace thing, which kind of ties into my next point, is the more you try and explain things like hyperspace, the more Star Wars just gets confusing and plot holes and all that stuff. So, okay, there are a lot of ways that you could theoretically weaponize hyperspace, and because you never see it in the original trilogy or the prequels, or as far as I know, all of Legends, people just assumed that it's just a thing that wouldn't happen, because if there's a way to weaponize something, most likely it's probably been, like, thought of before, if not done. And if it's something like hyperspace, where if you weaponize it, it's like super powerful, like hyperspace could just easily be weaponized, ramming ships into each other, especially with using, like, droids as pilots. You could do what you do in Light of the Jedi, where you basically just send a ship into hyperspace, have it break up, and then it, like, becomes, like, asteroids, like coming out of hyperspace and destroying entire planets. Like, that's a giant weapon for, like, say, the Nihil. They have, like, no restraint when it comes to morality, and yet they don't use this hyperspace, like, tactics, I guess. So when you try and, like, the more you use hyperspace, the more problems you have. So there are hyperspace problems, but like with how there's too many characters, I'm willing to look over that problem and just enjoy the story and kind of just ignore whenever they do hyperspace things, other than they get from point A to point B, I'm like not even gonna try and explain it because there's just like no way to explain it at this point. After The Last Jedi and after Light of the Jedi, um, but oh well, it's still a good book with good characters, um, and I guess a good setting. I guess the plot isn't super interesting, and it takes a while to get into it. I think that's because there's just too many characters. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's a good book. As for the Nile, like themselves, outside of the hyperspace thing, or actually, one more thing to talk about the hyperspace thing is the whole hyperspace when it comes to how the Nile use it in the first place. Not like the accident, not the great disaster, I think they call it. Um, but how the Nile like actually just go through hyperspace, like instead of through hyperlanes, through like I guess sideways through hyperlanes or however they explain it. They're trying to explain hyperspace in the book, and it's like, well, you're in your own pocket dimension and blah 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 and blah blah blah. And I didn't really listen to it because, like I said, I'm not going to try and explain hyperspace. I'm not going to try and understand hyperspace. It's just something in the story that gets you from point A to point B. But then they can go like sideways through hyperspace, and again, it's like, well, I'm not really going to worry too much about it. I'm just going to let the story, I guess, work itself out. Which is kind of sad that I have to do that, but at the same time, like, they needed the bad guy, and I guess that's what they came up with. I'm sure a lot of people really like the hyperspace stuff, but personally, I just have to ignore it because there's probably a million plot holes that you could dig into. Again, outside of hyperspace, the Nile are pretty interesting. They've got like this lead guy, and he's underestimated at first, but he's actually pretty ruthless. And then there's the the Tempests, I think. I finished the book like last week, right before the stream, so I had already like chosen my topic for a solo review. But so it's been a week since I read it, but I believe there's three people underneath the main leader. I believe they're called the Tempests, and they have like their own like fleets basically, and they're all just united by the eye. And he's like supposed to represent the eye of the storm of the Nile. And I forget his name. He's the main bad guy, and he has control of the paths. Like I said, there's a lot of characters, so I'm gonna do a lot of forgetting of names. But yeah, the eye of the storm, the bad guy. I feel like I should remember his name. I know I remembered it a little bit earlier today, but anyways, that guy. If you read the book, you know who I'm talking about. I don't know. He's very interesting. He's very ruthless. I like that he's like a descendant of the Lor San Tekka clan, or not the Lor San Tekka, the San Tekka. That's very interesting. I love how they're tying in like that one random guy from The Force Awakens and bringing it back all the way to the Light of the Jedi, or to the High Republic era, so you can kind of see where he came from and what his legacy is. And that's very interesting. Then there was this scientist guy. I don't know, I didn't really like his plotline very much, because I feel like spending so much on that giant computer, like all your astromechs, that seems a bit unbelievable. But it was actually pretty cool to see that like the Jedi they made it like rain by like basically airbending, I guess. Which was a cool scene. I thought they were gonna make it snow, but I guess rain is cool too. Yeah, but I don't know. He seemed just a bit boring, I guess, to me. I don't know. What did you think of that whole plot line? Then there's the Loden Greatstorm and his apprentice. I liked that plot line a lot. I think if I were a Jedi, I would see the Force very similar to the apprentice. And just see, like, from the perspective of the apprentice, seeing how amazing, like, the Jedi are, even though he's, like, an apprentice, or even though he's a Jedi, he's still an apprentice, so he can be amazed when his master does cool stuff. And that allows the reader to also feel that and also be amazed. And also Loden Greatstorm is just pretty cool, so I liked that whole storyline. Avar Chris and again, I think it's a Duros, but I'm not certain about that. Um, Avar Chris and her friend person, that's a cool plot line. I'm actually hoping they do more on that, because I love seeing like I don't know, just the Jedi struggling to be Jedi, I guess. Um, I don't know. I feel like there was some good writing there, and they could do a lot more with that. I also, I don't know, what is Buryaga? What did I think of him? I don't know. Buryaga seemed a bit like he's just a Wookiee Jedi, I guess. Um, and he's just an apprentice, so I guess it makes sense. What other plot lines were there? I'm trying to think. I feel like I'm missing one. It's probably just the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about just like the whole setting of it and all of the like stuff they have in the Republic. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Jedi ship, the Vectors. That's pretty cool. They called it Vector, and every time they would maybe okay, not every time. The first like 5 times they like named it, like mentioned the ship, I was thinking like literally the word Vector, and I was just a bit confused. But after that, it's just a cool name for a ship, and it really gives the idea of like a nimble ship with very minimal controls, which lines up pretty well with the later ships that the Jedi have, like during the or not during the Clone Wars, like before the Clone Wars, like in Episode 2. So it lines up pretty well with those ships, which I like. Then there's the Republic, and they're like only in the mid-rim and the core worlds, which I love that. I love that the outer, like you're exploring the outer rim during the High Republic. That's a cool concept to me. The lightsabers, I guess, are just normal. What else is there? They're Jedi robes, like all over the covers, it's like all yellow. But then in the book, it's like, oh, they were wearing ceremonial robes because they were going to like dedicate the Starlight Beacon. But really, they just wear normal stuff. Which I don't know. I guess I don't like that as much because I kind of wish that. Well, one of two options. You could go the normal route and just say, don't put the flashy robes on the cover and just have the normal robes on the cover. Or you could go the other route and say, hey, the flashy robes are a good idea because they show the prosperity and pride of the Jedi Order of the time. Yeah, I don't know. So, it's just, I think they should have gone one way or the other rather than, like, having all the yellowy robes all over the cover art, but then when you actually get into the story, they, like, take them off after the first mission. Yeah, so that's about the Republic. I guess it's just kind of the same. There's not too much to talk about in this book, at least not yet. I feel like as the like High Republic era gets more fleshed out, then this book might seem like have more significance. You could talk about how it plays into like the other books, but for now it's just kind of an introduction into the world. And I think it's a good introduction. I haven't read the other one, but I think if you were going to kind of like introduce yourself into this world, like I don't know. Okay, on the one hand, there's a lot of characters. Well, I suppose this is the entire problem. There's a lot of characters, so you're introducing yourself to a wide range of this world. So you're kind of just getting a feel for this, like in the state of the galaxy at this point. But at the same time, with so many characters, it can be overwhelming if you're not used to the era. So for someone like me, I like reading this book. I think this is a good introduction to the era. But for other people, I guess they might want like a more focused introduction and really get pulled into the characters, like a specific main character or maybe a few main characters, rather than like the dozen or half a dozen or however many characters we got. But yeah, another thing that I noticed, something that I didn't really like, but again, I kind of just got over it because it's not too big of a problem. Is the voice actor would sometimes like use a kind of strange voice for characters, kind of like a Goofy or a Jar Jar type voice, rather than just like a normal voice. but I don't know. Maybe it doesn't bother people as much, but it bothered me a bit, and I kind of didn't like that. But it's fine. It's still a good book. And if you're reading it like the paper version or even an online version, if you're like literally reading it rather than what I do is listening to it, then yeah, that won't bother you at all. But for me, at least, it was a little bit awkward at times. But for the most part, this was a good book. I don't know. I think it just had good, good to solid writing, even if like the story itself wasn't super good. It was kind of all over the place. It has a lot of reliance on hyperspace, which often leads to plot holes. And I'm pretty sure if I dug deep into the story, I would find, yes, there's a lot of plot holes. The characters aren't super interesting, but it's written in a way that it's written very well. So it's still a good read. It's very, I don't know, a satisfying book to read. And I think it's a good introduction into the High Republic era. So that's my thoughts on the High Republic. What do you think of the High Republic? And specifically, what do you think of Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule? So with that, I'm going to move on to the next segment, which is the 7 forms of lightsaber combat. So if you don't know, in Star Wars there's these things called lightsabers, and people fight with them. And there's 7 forms of combat that people use. So this just means there's like 7 styles of fighting, or at least this is how I see it. There are 7 styles of fighting, but you can like mix and match them together. So you could have someone who uses like Form 1 and Form 3, and they're going to fight completely differently from someone who uses Form 1 and Form 4. And even if you have someone who fights like with Form 1 and Form 3, there could be another person who uses the same forms, but they fight differently, just because it's like a difference in styles. But it's like they've got 7 main styles that pretty much everything falls into. So I'm just going to go through each one of them and kind of describe them. So Form 1 is the first form ever made, and this is something I love about the 7 forms of lightsaber combat. Oh, and quick disclaimer, pretty much everything I know about the 7 forms of lightsaber combat comes from Legends. I believe that there's like a book out there that mentions them and like details them, and then it's various forms have been mentioned throughout canon. For example, Windu mentions Vapad. He's in episode 3 when he's fighting Sidious. He's like, Anakin, this is beyond Vapad or something. And then in Rebels, during the first battle between Kanan Jarrus and the Grand Inquisitor is basically like, yeah, you rely on Form 3 to a ridiculous degree, and that's how I know who your master is. Which, even though that doesn't really make sense, realistically he should be like, well, I've looked at, like instead of figuring out who his master is by his lightsaber form, he should figure out who Kanan Jarrus is through his lightsaber form, and then know who his master is through Kanan Jarrus. I think that's a lot more plausible of an explanation. Because obviously Anakin doesn't use Form 3, Obi-Wan uses Form 3, so, like, clearly it's not like your master determines your form. You determine your form, and that's going to be influenced by your master. For example, Ahsoka learned Form 5, at least a little bit. She supplemented it with Form 4. Then there's, who is it? Obi-Wan Kenobi learned Form 4, and he uses that in Episode 1 mostly, but he also uses it a bit at other times. And his master, Qui-Gon Jinn, used Form 4 as well. And Qui-Gon's master's master, Master Yoda, also used Form 4. So there's like a strong lineage of Form 4 in that line of masters. But as I was saying, because the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, like, they have numbers, and that corresponds to when they were made, and it kind of like, they kind of flow from one form to the other. Like, it starts with Form 1, and Form 1 is often described as like basic. Like the benefits of Form 1 are like, it's very simple to use, which means you can like be a lot more creative in your fighting. Like a lot of what you do is based on instinct, which is, it's faster. It's like you're not relying on like tight maneuvers or strong attacks. It's more free flowing and there's a lot of wider arcs. So it's just easier to, I guess, flow with the fight um, and be a bit more creative with your fighting. So that's the first form. It's often described as simple for those reasons, and that's because it is. It's like the first. It's the first lightsaber form ever made, so it's going to be a lot more simple than the other ones. Then after Shucho, you get to Mukashi, which is all about like one-on-one dueling. It's a lot like fencing. Think Count Dooku, and that's your like archetype form two. Grip like one-handed lightsaber, pointing towards your opponent, kind of turned sideways. Lots of good positioning, always ready to stab forward or take a step back. It's very fencing-like, and it's very conducive to one-on-one combat. And it's probably, or at least in Legends, it was developed to directly combat Form 1, because Form 1 is kind of more free-flowing, and Form 2 is like, well, if you're going to overswing, I'm just going to be ready to stab you, because I'm using Form 2, and I'm always ready because I'm in good positioning. Then you have Form 3, and this is kind of, at least in Legends, again, most of this is Legends information. Then you have Form 3, which is a reaction to the development of blasters and the wider use of them. And I could be wrong on this, but I think it might also be like the Sith were like banished, or the Jedi like ended the Great Schism or whatever. There's some history there, but I'm not quite sure when this takes place. But it comes about due to like Mukashi falling out of style, because you're no longer fighting a duelist, you're fighting blaster wielding opponents. And so you have this defensive style that's very good at deflecting lots of blaster fire. So there's Form 3. And going along with Form 3, there's also Form 4, which is a lot faster, so you can close the distance on blaster fire. You can close the distance on Form 3 users. So it's just kind of a reaction to blaster fire and Form 3 users. And let me briefly describe those two. Form 3 is basically the defensive form is basically the easiest way to describe it. It's got a solid stance, but it's not like super rigid. Like really tight elbows, always ready to move the blade in the way. Lots of static blocks. So you're not usually like deflecting a blow. You're usually blocking it. Think if you want to think of one. If you want to think of a specific character, the go-to character for Form 3 is Obi-Wan Kenobi, which it's not quite as pronounced as, say, like Count Dooku in Form 2, or as I'm going to get to, like Yoda in Form 4, simply because Form 3 it's like a very common, like, fighting style, like, in our own world. Like, you get two kids, like, and give them, like, those plastic lightsabers, one of them is going to, like, use Form 5, the other one's going to use Form 3, probably. I mean, like, there's some variations there. You might have a kid who uses Form 1 or whatever, but they're going to have some elements of Form 3. It's very similar to, like, common fighting. Two hands, solid stance, you know. It's Form 3. Just think like Obi-Wan. Minus, like, the flips, because he does use some, like, Ataru as well. But when he's on defensive, that's Obi-Wan. So watch closely and you see Form 3. Then there's Form 4, which, as I mentioned earlier, can be, like, the archetype of Form 4 is like a Yoda. Like, lots of flips, lots of outmaneuvering, outflanking, the whole, like, Jedi flips, it seems unrealistic. However, there is another side to Form 4, and that is, like, Qui-Gon Jinn. Oftentimes when I bring up Form 4, I bring up both Yoda and Qui-Gon Jinn, because Yoda uses Form 4, but he's kind of an extreme version of it, because he's short, so he actually uses Form 4 to make up for his lack of reach. And so he's, like, jumping all over the place, like, way more than a normal Form 4. And then there's Qui-Gon Jinn, who, although I don't think it's confirmed in Legends, he at least seems to me to be using a lot of Form 5 as well. He seems to have a lot of power behind his attacks, rather than just jumping around and outflanking. And perhaps he incorporated more Form 5 as he got older and slower. But at the very least, I do think he uses some elements of Form 5. But still, his primary form is Form 4. And you can see that Form 4 isn't always the same way Yoda uses it, where it's all flashy and flippy and all that. It's just also just an aggressive form, I guess. I forgot what I was going to mention, so I'm just going to move on to Form 5, which is another one targeted toward blaster fire, except Form 5, for some reason, I don't know why, but Form 5 is split into two different words. And I should probably go through these real quick because I don't think I mentioned them. Form 1 is also known as Shi-Cho, and there's various pronunciations of it, but Shi-Cho is how I learned it. And then Form 2 is called Makashi or Makashi or whatever. You can say it however you want. Then there's Form 3, which is Sorisu, or a lot of people say Sorasu or Sorasu. Again, it's just a bunch of vowels. You can say it however you want. It's English. Vowels don't do anything. Then there's Form 4, Ataru, and then Form 5 is for some reason split into Shien and Jamso. Shien is specifically blaster fire, and Jamso is specifically lightsaber combat. At least that's how I understand it. Anyways, Form 5 is all about redirecting your opponent's attacks against them. And this isn't quite that's the basic explanation, but it's more specific than that. With blaster fire, that's about all the explanation you need. You're not, in Form 3, you're just deflecting bolts to the side, you're just batting them away as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. But Form 5, you're actually, angling your lightsaber and deflecting the blaster bolts back at the shooter. Which is why oftentimes when you shoot at a Jedi, the bullets go right back, because they've done some Shien, and they're ready to shoot your bullets right back at you. Then there's the lightsaber dueling aspect of Form 5, which I find a lot more interesting, but it's also redirecting your... it's kind of. It's not so much redirecting your attack, so much as it is, when they block your attack, they're going to strike with so much power that your attack is not the attack. Their attack is just going to push your blade back towards you, just using brute strength. So you see a lot of Darth Vader, what's his name? Blanking on his name. It's not Darth Malak, it's Darth Malgus, and Darth Bane. All the big buff people, oftentimes they use Form 5, because it relies on a lot of strength based. I'm just gonna push you around so that you can attack. I'm attacking. It's very focused on getting the offense through strength. Then there's Form 6, also known as Niman, and this is a jack of all trades form. And this is probably the one I'm least comfortable with. But it's mostly just a versatile form that you can do pretty much whatever you want in. There's elements of all the forms, basically. There's a lot of... Oftentimes, a Niman user will use, different weapons, saber staff, or dual-bladed, or this kind of stuff. And to me, using, a saber staff doesn't necessarily mean you use Niman, but if you're comfortable with a saber staff, normal lightsaber, if you're comfortable with pretty much whatever, you might be a Niman user. But there also has to be some elements of just versatility in combat, and kind of just incorporating everything: offense, defense, precision, simplicity, acrobatics, and stability. All the stuff. It's all mixed into one. Then there's Form 7, which is split into Juyo and Vapad. But this one actually makes sense, at least to me. Juyo is the original Form 7, and first I'm just going to give a brief description of Form 7 offense. That's pretty much the focus of Form 7, is just taking out your opponent as quickly as possible. So Juyo is the original Form 7, and it's actually based in the dark side. So oftentimes Juyo users will draw on their dark emotions and use anger and all this stuff to kind of focus their attacks on their opponent. Which, how that's a fighting style, I'm not entirely sure, but I guess it's just the mentality you use that splits it from Vapad to Juyo. But Form 7 as a whole is just offensive, so it kind of makes sense that those who use it are going to rely more on their anger in combat, because that's a good fuel for taking out your opponent as quick as possible. It's just good practice for when you're on offense, I guess. Okay, so Huh, that's weird. The chat thing wasn't. The chat thing isn't working. I guess I have to go over here. That's fine. I can hang out in this page for most of the time. You can't really see the page I'm talking to. I don't know. I'm talking about that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's a couple chats that came in. Jeremiah said, "What is the great disaster?" Referring to the last segment, which is all about the light of the Jedi. And it's basically, read the book. It'll tell you what the great disaster is. So yeah, all of you should go read Light of the Jedi. It's a good book. Then watch my review on it. And then Jeff Summers said he thinks he's either Form 2 or Form 3, which, yeah, I can see. I can also see Form 1 for you. But yeah, Form 2 and Form 3, I could totally see you, especially if you were to pick one. I think you'd pick one of those two. Yeah, and so anyways, Form 1 is kind of simplicity. It's lots of wide strikes and movements. Form 2 is very precise. You're always in good position and ready to take advantage of any mistakes your opponents make. Then you've got Form 3, which is defensive. It's just like solid stance, elbows tight, defensive. Then there's Form 4, which is acrobatic, which seems unrealistic until you realize that Jedi have the Force, and then it's like, oh, that makes sense, it's a lightsaber form. So yeah, Form 4 is kind of offensive, lots of outflanking, and not so much blocks as much as dodges. I mean, there are blocks, but like when they do block, it's more of a deflection rather than a solid block. Then there's Form 5, which is all about redirection, specifically redirection through just being stronger. Then there's Form 6, Miman, which is like the Jack of all trades form. It's a bit of everything. Then there's Form 7, which is just super aggressive, super offensive. Yeah, so that's all 7 lightsaber forms. Leave your, picks for which ones you would want to use. Actually, I'm never good at choosing one. I think I would probably actually choose Neiman now that I think about it, because like I change so often. So I'm gonna say Neiman because it's a jack of all trades. I'm gonna also add Shicho because I just kind of think that the simplicity is kind of nice, and Makashi as well, because Makashi is just the best. I do obviously I'm not a Jedi. I don't do a lot of blaster fighting, but I do play with my friends sometimes and do some sword fighting. There's other weapons too, but so Makashi kind of applies in that sense because Makashi is focused more on melee weapon dueling rather than blaster wielding. So I'm going to say if I were to pick 3 forms, I would do Form 6, Form 1, and Form 2. And you don't have to do 3, you don't have to do 1 or 2. Choose however many and leave your picks in the chat or in the comments. But with that, I think I'm going to move to the next segment, which is all about the future of Star Wars. Is it going to be in movies or in TV shows? And this is I think it's a fairly common question. There have been a lot of TV shows announced recently, and there's been movies announced, but they're for years later. So a lot of people are thinking, well, is the future of Star Wars going to be in TV shows? Are we switching over to instead of focusing on just a movie once a year, are we going to have TV shows, one per season, I guess? We're going to have stuff on Disney Plus all the time. And that's a good question. And an even bigger question is the future of cinematic storytelling going to be TV shows, with theaters shutting down for COVID and streaming services on the rise. It's a pretty big question, and it's something I want to cover. What's the word for it? So with that said, is the future of Star Wars in movies or is it in TV shows? So to start off with, a quick disclaimer: I didn't have time to write down any notes, so this is all just straight from my brain into the microphone, into the computer, into your computer. I don't know how this works. Hello, Ruthie. How you doing? I got my whole family here, pretty much. Not quite, really, but some of them. Anyways, so Star Wars is okay. This is like it's difficult to explain like the pros and cons. I'm just gonna go through the pros and cons. I'm gonna write down a bunch of pros and cons about movies and TV shows. So for pros, and leave your ideas in the chat for like what are the pros and cons of movies and TV shows. So for movies, oftentimes you can tell I think okay. I'm gonna start with TV shows. There's more time in TV shows when you like watch like a TV series. Say you watch season 1 of the Clone Wars. Each episode is 20 minutes, and there's like 22 of them. So overall, that's like 22 times 20 is 440 minutes, or no, is it 4,400? Anyways, it's a lot more than 2 hours. Like 6 episodes would be 2 hours. So like with 22 episodes, it's like over 3 times as long as a movie. So shows have a lot more time. So that's both a pro and a con. They take more time to watch, but they also like you can develop more stuff. So I'm gonna just write more time on TV shows. And then obviously for movies, they're shorter. Like opposite basically, because we're doing pros and cons and stuff. Then there's, I guess the community aspect of it. When you go to, when you go to like a movie, you often go to a theater and there's a lot of people and there's cheering. I guess I don't really go to the movies that much. I go to a bunch of Star Wars movies, or I went to all the Star Wars movies in theaters. I've seen a bunch of Marvel movies in theaters. It's been fun. I've seen some other random ones in there, but mostly I just watch stuff at home. So there's the community aspect of everyone showing up to the movie theater and just seeing the movie with the crowd and on the big screen. The other aspect is the big screen. When you go to a movie theater, they're investing a lot more into that sound system, into that screen, into the maybe into the seating, I guess. I don't know. They're investing a lot more than you are able to, because you're only doing it for yourself. I mean, from a certain point of view, you're gonna have that for maybe longer than them, or I guess, say you watch a movie every day. Even then, though, there's outside of COVID times, there's dozens of people watching movies every day in theaters, and probably even more. There's a lot of people watching movies, so they can invest a lot more into those because there's more people using it. At the same time, it's a lot more convenient to watch stuff at home because you don't have to get up, you don't have to drive, you don't have to pay for a ticket, although you probably have to subscribe to a streaming service, so there's that. But you can just stay home, you can, you don't even have to get dressed if you don't want to, which, for me, not a big deal. Getting dressed isn't that hard. But it's just the convenience of not having to do anything except turn on the TV or open up your phone, maybe turn on a pair of earbuds or something. It's a lot more convenient to watch outside of the theater. But taking an outside of the theater argument, because this has really become just a theater versus watching at home. When you watch, I guess, outside of the, if a TV show is to, be seen, okay, TV shows are almost always seen at home, but if a movie was to be seen at home, compare that to a TV show seen at home, I think the biggest difference is just the amount of time. There is another idea here, which is, oftentimes, TV shows will have because it's an episodic series, they might have more of an episodic structure. For example, look at the best example in Star Wars is The Mandalorian. You have episode 1, 2, and 3, and they're all kind of connected. He gets the child, he his ship is destroyed, and he has to kill this Mudhorn thing, and at the climax of that fight, the child reveals that he has powers. Then after that, he goes back to Navarro, and he turns in the child, and he frees him. And that's one story arc. And then after this, you have another story arc, which takes one episode. And that's the episode 4 story arc, or chapter 4, I should say. Then there's chapter 5, which is also its own story arc, and then chapter 6. And sure, they kind of tell this whole story arc of him like running away, but really they're just much more episodic in nature rather than serialized. Whereas another show, like say, Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you've seen that show, it's a great show. If you haven't, you should watch it. But Avatar: The Last Airbender, there's some episodic episodes like the Great Divide. What else is there? There's the play with like the recap. Yeah, so there's some episodic, but mostly it's just telling one big story. And before I ramble on any further, Jeremiah says, I think TV shows are cooler, but they take way more time. Which, yes, that's like, the big thing is time. With more time, there's more investment, and yes, I agree, it's cooler because of that, but again, it takes more time. So then there's, so episodic structures are often seen in TV shows because they're done episode by episode. And that's good because, well, if it wasn't, you would spend like I said, you'd spend like 6 hours, or you'd spend so much time. Let's just use Mandalorian. It's easier math. 8 episodes, about 30 minutes, a bit over usually, but whatever. So that's like 4 hours of your time that you're going to sit down and, like, that's half a work shift for most people. People don't have time for that. But if you split it up into episodes, then that's when you can digest a whole series. Of course, there is binge watching, but I don't have time for that. I don't know how realistic that is to have time to watch an entire series. But anyways, other than time in the episodic structure, there's not much difference like between movies and TV shows outside of just like convention, like what's normally done. And so that's where you see a bit more of the pros of movies, at least to some extent. Because usually in movies, like, the scale is a lot more grand. So, like, let's again look at, like, Star Wars and the Clone Wars and Mandalorian. Most episodes aren't that impactful. There's some that are just super impactful, like, oftentimes the finale of a show, or, say, like, there's a bunch of arcs in the Clone Wars. The Umbara arc, kind of, it's more just a good arc rather than like a super impactful and galaxy-wide, galaxy-changing one. But then there's also stuff like the very last one with Order 66 taking place. But then you look at movies like The Revenge of the Sith, Empire Strikes Back, The Rise of Skywalker. All of these have like galaxy-changing events like throughout the entire movie. So movies are often on a grander scale, and that can be good, it can be bad. It's less personal and kind of less realistic, I guess. It's less believable, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to put the idea into words. But with a smaller scale, it's more intimate, I think is the word I'm looking for. If you're on such a grand scale, it's harder to connect with the characters because the characters are dealing with so much more. At the same time, it's not impossible. You still have like Luke Skywalker. He's taking on the Emperor. He's there with Vader, and he's got like his father is this evil bad guy, like, and he has to turn him back to the light side. And yet you can still connect with that character, even though you've never done anything that's going to affect an entire galaxy. I don't think you have. If you have, leave it in the chat. That'd be pretty cool. But even if you haven't done anything on that grand of a scale, you can understand the emotional struggles of similar choices, even though they're smaller. At the same time, though, like having a smaller scale can be more realistic and more relatable. Even if it's not as epic or cool or grand. So that's oftentimes movies are a bit more flashy, a bit more grand, and another thing, they often have a bit more budget in them. Although, like I said earlier, TV shows have more time, so it kind of balances out. I think, I'm not quite sure, I'm not super into the finances of movies. If you are, let me know, like, what is the typical budget for an entire TV show, or one episode of a TV show and compare that to movies. And also, it kind of depends. From what I hear, The Mandalorian has a pretty high budget for a TV show. I'm sure a lot of Star Wars movies do, except for maybe the first one. That one probably didn't. But there's a lot to consider when analyzing the difference between movies and TV shows. So I guess it's difficult for me to come to a conclusion. But one more thing I do want to address when it comes to movies or TV shows is specifically relating to Star Wars. Star Wars is one, it's often on a grand scale, which look at books like The High Republic and you see like this entire galaxy-wide event. You look at all the movies, galaxy-wide events, galaxy changing. Even The Mandalorian. Well, okay, maybe not The Mandalorian. I have a feeling The Mandalorian will eventually. Maybe even Season 3. Season 3 seems to be setting up like a Mandalorian Civil Wars, like fight for the Darksaber type thing. And that I'm pretty excited for, assuming they do it, of course. And also, that's like a pretty grand event, I guess. So Star Wars is kind of usually in this more grander, less smaller scale, more large scale. And in addition, and also this could be like the reason for that, Star Wars is originally a movie, and the movies are like what most people know, so it just kind of makes sense to keep it as movies being like the future of Star Wars. But there are a lot of merits to TV shows, one of which being Disney Plus. Disney just, like, they made their new streaming service, Disney Plus. So, honestly, I don't know. It's really up to Disney. At this point, it seems like it's, like, Star Wars is mostly going to be held up by TV shows, but I feel like they're planning a bunch of movies for coming down the pipeline. Like, just wait a few years and maybe we'll get back to, like, one movie a year and maybe less TV shows, maybe more TV shows. Who knows? The future is hard to predict. Even Master Yoda says that the future is always in motion. So, I guess if I had to guess, I would say it's going to stay, like, TV shows are going to be the focus of Star Wars for, I don't know when the next movie comes out. I'm going to say they're going to be the main focus for the next 4 years. And then after that, it's going to be mostly movies again. Like, I think there will probably be maybe just as much movies as there is TV shows, but I think the movies will have more, like, marketing. There'll be more focus on them in the marketing. So movies, that's my conclusion. I believe movies are going to be the future of Star Wars. If you disagree, if you agree, leave any of your thoughts in the chat or leave them in the comments. But that's all I've got for this video, but not for the stream. I'm still streaming. Although, this is pretty much the end of the stream. Feel free to leave any critiques, compliments, questions, anything you have to say about Star Wars, or about any of the topics I have, those being the High Republic, the 7th Performance of Lightsaber Combat, movies or TV shows, what's the future of Star Wars. Leave your guess as to what 3 Jedi served on the Council during both Episode 1 and the High Republic. But with that, I think that's going to be the end of the stream. I'm going to wait a bit so that you have a chance to leave any last chats that you want to chat in and with your chatting powers. Because, there's a bit of lag on that, on the chat. I believe it's like a 30-second lag. But with that, I think I'm going to end this stream right about now.